Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today I'm happy to introduce my guest, Shahir. Shahir is studying at Texas Tech University on a presidential merit-based scholarship, and his family currently holds Special Immigrant Visa and Priority 2 U.S. Refugee Admissions Program cases, and have been greatly impacted by the executive orders suspending the USRAP and freezing foreign aid. So, Shahir, it's so great to have you with me to talk about what you've gone through to get here to the U.S. and what your family is facing right now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk. And I think this is a great opportunity to amplify the voices of the Afghans in need, and specifically the ones who hold refugee cases and are affected by the administration's recent executive orders.
Absolutely. And I'd like just for the audience to know, we're recording this on the 20th of March, and the deadline, as far as I've heard, for when the travel ban that we've all been waiting for to be instituted is tomorrow. And so this will obviously be released after the travel ban, but we don't know what that's going to contain, whether it's going to impact all Afghans, whether it's going to impact only those who don't have SIV or USRAP referrals. And so just so you all know, by the time by the time you hear this, you will know what is in it, but we don't right now. And regardless of what that contains, this story is important, and the stories of all Afghans who are involved in this are so important right now. And I think standing beside our allies has never been more important than it is currently. Well, Shahir, to get started, I would love to hear, it's really impressive to me that you earned this scholarship to Texas Tech, and I'd love to hear about your schooling and what it took for you to earn that scholarship and get your way to the U.S. for that opportunity.
Thank you for the appreciation. Well, I could briefly start as the way I grew up, because the mindset I had and all those struggles as a kid ended me up here today. And I grew up in Afghanistan. I really loved physics. Not physics really, but to understand the universe. And I read philosophy to understand the universe. I read religion to understand the universe. I would just go around wandering around trees, or as my mom used to call it, like jumping from trees like monkeys. And trying to understand nature and to try to understand the universe. At some point I learned that the best way to learn about the universe is to understand mathematics and physics, because that's the language with which the universe talks. So if you want to understand it, you should learn her language. So I started learning physics, some physics, and then I got introduced to likes of Carl Sagan and what they did, Michael Faraday, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I deeply admire and inspired me. I read them a lot, and I didn't know much English back then, but I started finding such as some lectures on Stanford University's YouTube page. They were physics lectures, so I started watching them as a kid. And then I realized that at that point that the idea I had, which turned out to be true when I came to the United States, is that United States is this beacon of hope and an inspiration in the world, because almost all of my heroes at the time had at some point either were born and lived in the United States or had ended up in the United States. One great example was Albert Einstein, who was a great physicist, but at the same time, during the persecution of Jews in the World War II, he chooses United States to immigrate to. In United States to become a home to people who flee war, who flee prosecution. That in itself to me was a great act of moral highness. And I felt inspired by United States. I felt inspired by its founding fathers as to why they do this. And so what I did was, so the idea was instilled in me as a kid, and the idea that I should study in the United States and prove that I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people that I admire, despite every struggle that it will have taken me. And at the time, it seemed impossible because I do not come from a rich family. I came from a neighborhood in which when you would graduate from school, you had three options. You either join the military, or you score really good at university entrance exam and you get into a public university because you couldn't afford private university, or you try to get to outside of the country and become a refugee and have an uncertain future for an uncertain amount of time. So I pursued physics. I studied physics, and I took the university entrance exam, and I got placed into Kabul University's physics program, which I was very happy about it. But then during my studies in Kabul University, during my very first semester, there were in 2019. During my first semester, there were two suicide bombings in the vicinity of the Kabul University, because it was Afghanistan's top university at the time, so it was also a hotspot of suicide bombings, because you would want to kill the brain and the intellectual power of a country if you want to cripple it. So then my family decided that it's not safe for me to be going to Kabul University, because I remember I used to go from the Northern Gate, as it's called, and both of the suicide bombings had happened outside the Northern Gate of the Kabul University. So then I applied to universities in Turkey. I got accepted, and then I moved to Turkey. I studied Turkish language for 1 year because it was a requirement. And then I prepared for SAT, because most universities in Turkey accepted SAT that I wanted to go to. So then I took SAT exam, and at the same time, the situation in Afghanistan was deteriorating day by day. The provinces were falling, and as of my understanding at the time was that the United States is going to withdraw from Afghanistan, regardless of what's going to happen. Some people did believe that United States will stay in Afghanistan to support the government, but to me, which could have been wrong, but to me, Afghanistan was United States' lost cause. It seemed as if they no longer care. It seemed as if they have just given up on everything, and they want to leave. So then I changed my plans, because in Turkey, had I stayed, I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I had here in the United States. So then I took a CT exam. I applied to Texas Tech University, and they accepted me, and then they also offered me Presidential Merit-based scholarship based off of my diploma from high school and based off of my SAT score. I got accepted, and I didn't know United States would approve a visa for me, because it's very, very hard to get a visa. And most people who advocate for people coming into United States legally should understand that coming through legal ways is, in some instances, it's way tougher than coming in illegally. That's why some people resort to coming in illegally, because nobody likes to break a law. So I wasn't sure if I would get a visa, because it's very, very tough. And then I went to interview, I got approved. I came to United States on August of 2022, and I have been here since.
Oh, that's amazing. And I know you wanted to talk about what it was like in Turkey. I know that, just so viewers have a little bit of background, Afghans fled all to any neighboring country or safe place during the post-withdrawal period, and Turkey was one of the places that Afghans fled to a lot, along with Iran, along with Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, I've heard, So tell me, Shahir, what you saw in Turkey that, Afghans were having to go through while living there, probably many of them illegally.
It was an experience in which, if it hadn't been managed correctly, it would have sown great hatred towards humanity in me. If I hadn't had correct retrospection and had learned the correct lessons, which I think I have learned the correct lessons and not the hate part. Life was very tough for Afghans, very, very tough. In Turkey, people who were legally or illegally, but if you were illegally there, it was very tough. You could not even rent a house. Like one of the things I love here in the United States, like right now I live where I want. It's very close to campus. It's very close to Walmart. I don't need a car. I can live. And to me, this is considered a luxury, to be able to live in a place that you can afford. because in Turkey, the sentiment toward Afghans, especially after the 2021 and 2020, when the situation started deteriorating and more Afghans are starting showing up in Turkey, the public sentiment toward Afghans turned out was very negative. It was very negative. And they considered me as somebody who Turks, and I'm not generalizing Turks, but the part of them which was there's always an extremist and racist faction among all societies, and Turkey is not exempt from it. They also have some factions that are very racist and they have hate toward any foreigners, specifically Afghans. So the fact that in their eyes I did not look like an Afghan, I used to have better privilege than my fellow Afghans because apparently they look like Afghans, but nobody would know that I'm an Afghan unless I would start speaking. So if they wanted to rent a house, I had to go talk to the house owner because if the house owner knew you were an Afghan, you could not get a place to stay. Many people had kids and they didn't have no place to stay because you could afford it, but they weren't willing to give you their house. So I think housing is basic human right. Since the dawn of humanity, housing is a human right. So housing, you don't even have that guaranteed when you live in Turkey, especially if you're illegally there as an Afghan. And then after the collapse of the government, I remember I had this, I wouldn't call it argument, but I would call it discussion with one of the Turks, through which when people were running after the US planes, when that video came out of people running after the United States military planes, at that time Turkey was building a border wall between Turkey and Iran to specifically prevent Afghans from coming into Turkey. And I looked at the video of Afghans falling from the airplane. I could fully understand it. I could fully understand the desperation you would feel to go run after a running plane. Like it's illogical to be running after a plane that's in runway and trying to take off. It's almost certain death clinging onto it. But I understood the desperation it takes you to do it. I understood it fully. I had lived in Afghanistan. I knew what people thought of the Taliban, what people thought of the United States, and what people thought of the Afghan government. So to me, it was completely justified. It was not savage to be running after that plane. To me, it was very human. It was the fundamental of being human to seek safety for yourself and for your children. If a fire breaks out in a house, the first thing a mom would do is to run and save her children. The second thing she would do is to save herself. Nobody will stay in a burning house. So it's very human. If you do not run out of a burning house and you get burnt there, some people might actually call you stupid and say like, the house was burning, why didn't you try to leave? You know, you had legs, you had arms, why didn't you run? At the least, you could have run somewhere. So to me, it was fully understandable, but Turks started saying, many of them, I should avoid saying Turks because not all Turks are like that. I know some great Turkish people. I have seen great love from them, even Turkish community here in the United States. I'm indebted to them. They have shown me great love. But some specific functions of them. One of them had said that, these people who are running after these planes, and my government thinks a wall would stop them. I think it was very dehumanizing. And to me, I felt deep hurt because I remember there was a suicide bombing in front of the US Embassy in Kabul in 2007. And at the time, my dad used to work for the US Embassy. And the suicide bombing was so powerful that it happened in summer. But when you would go to the impacted area, to the area that was the ground zero for it, all the trees were bald, and all you could see in the branches of trees, they were bald because of the shock wave of the explosion. All the leaves were gone. And all you could see in the branches of the tree were human flesh. So to me, I think those Afghans running after the US planes, they were a couple years too late. I think if I weren't a kid, I would have run out in 2007 after seeing those scenes. So I felt those comments by those fraction of Turkish people. I felt I didn't allow it to turn into a hate, but it did hurt me, and it hurt me deeply. And the only response I had was that um, these people have been through living hell, and it's only a logical decision to try to escape hell. And when you are in hell, you think anything outside is better, no matter how bad. Anything outside is better, and that's what Afghans in Turkey used to say. I encountered many moms who would say, "Yeah, our life is hard. We are disrespected on a daily basis. We don't have a house to stay at. But at least I don't worry about my young son getting blown away in a suicide bombing in Kabul." And to me, that's everything. And I understood those moms and I understood their comments because if you're a human, if you have sympathy, um, you understand it. And the only way you would make those comments, as some of those people were making, is if you don't have no sympathy or no humanity left in you.
Absolutely. What it always reminded me of was the imagery from 9/11 of the people in the office buildings who leapt from the sides of the office buildings that were on fire, and they knew they were never going to survive that, right? They knew they couldn't survive that fall, but it was the last thing they could do, either that or choke to death on smoke. What choice? And it was so horrifying to watch that what started the conflict for us. I mean, obviously Afghans had been living with the Taliban and all of the horrors that they brought to Afghanistan for years when 9/11 hit the US. But our introduction to it was just a horror that anyone who lived through it will never forget. And so to see those images in my mind's eye compared with those images of Afghans falling from the plane, it was hell to hell. And it was so horrible to watch and so horrible to hear about, because I know people who were on the airfield and saw what happened afterwards too. I mean, it's just so much pain and terror, and to hear it belittled like that, really, it would hurt. I mean, it hurts me to hear it now. So I'm sure that was really difficult. And all the things that you're describing, those are things that, Americans didn't have to see. The remnants of suicide bombings outside of your father's workplace or outside of your university. I mean, the life you're describing is something that's so alien to most Americans. What was it like for you when you came here? I mean, what was there culture shock when you arrived in Texas, or tell me about that experience?
That's a perfect question. Thank you so much for asking. I think in terms of culture shock, what I felt shocked was in terms of like the way people talk, the way people do stuff. I was kind of expecting it because I used to watch a lot of Hollywood movies, so I was kind of accustomed to US culture. But what was shocking to me was how alien our lives are, just as you mentioned. For instance, I remember I made this one friend. Her name was Megan. She was one of the first friends I made. A great person. She was a psychology student. We went on a walk around campus, and she asked me about life in Afghanistan. And after 2 to 3 sentences, she started crying. And to me, it was completely normal. To me, it was because that's all the life I knew. That's what I'd grown up. As one person said, if you're born in a burning house, you think the world is on fire. So to me, I realized, I should stop talking about these things to these people, because to them it's very alien. And so as soon as she started crying, that was when I realized our lives are very alien. And something else which was interesting to me was in those terms is there is no fear of loss, or almost no fear of loss. There is still some fear of loss in some people in here, but there is almost, in terms of like in my country, there's a fear of loss in a collective conscious of people, not on an individual level, but on a collection of society. But in here, it's not so much. You don't see it, which is a good thing, which is a great thing. And another culture shock to me was, I'm not sure if this would qualify as a culture shock or not, But given the United States dominance in the world stage, in United States military involvements around the world, the citizens of the United States had no idea about war, what war is, what war feels like, what price the people in whose territory that these wars take place they actually pay. I met many people who believed in win and lose in war. And my first response was, there is no winner in war. There is none. I lived through war. I was born. I lived 18 years there. There are no winners. So, in terms of food, in terms of how people behave, how people dress, how people talk, I wasn't really shocked as much because of the amount of movies I had watched, like tons of them. But in terms of how alien my life is from them, because in Afghanistan, like let's say I watch, I watch a movie, whatever, Avengers, let's say. I'm watching Avengers and I see people, and I see there's a subtle love story underlying the main story, and there are subtle relationships like Peter Parker um, with his aunt and stuff. And I also love my aunt, I also love my aunt. And there are also some romantic stories in people's life in Afghanistan too. So I would think we are not so much different. We almost live the same lives, because I realized the same way that you do not understand what war is unless you live it. You do not understand it by watching news. You do not understand it by reading books. You do not understand it by playing video games. You do not understand it by watching action movies, by World War II documentaries. The only way to truly understand what war is, you have to live in it. But I think I was naive back in Afghanistan to think that peace could be understood by reading about it. That peace could be understood by watching on TV how somebody lives in France, and you say, well, then that's peace. No, I learned that people I met had to share my experience of what war is, but by living in the United States, I get to, and I have to credit Turkey for it too, but by living in Turkey, in the United States, I learned what peace is. And I realized I had no idea what peace is until I was 18. And it was false to believe that I could understand it just by reading or watching movies and news about it.
Wow. That's so deep, and I love it. And I knew the part about war. I've never been to war. I only begun to understand it when I fell in love with someone who was about to go to war. And it changed my entire life. And I never went in, like I said, but knowing that, and it forever shifted my perspective. But the idea of having to learn what peace is, that's just, wow, what a thing. But that's the experience, right, in Afghanistan, because there hasn't been. When was the last time there was peace in Afghanistan? It's so now ingrained that someone is there bringing war to the country that, gosh, what do you think are the things you appreciate most that bring that home to you, that, that feeling that, okay, I'm living in peace right now? What are the things that really make you feel that way?
I think a great example was when I realized I did not understand. I have to talk about the experience that made me realize that, I didn't understand what peace was. So it was my first month in Turkey. It's my first month in Turkey, and I'm just living life. I'm learning Turkish language, and I used to stay in a dormitory. And in my dorm, there were like basketball fields. There was like a ping pong table tennis, as you call it in here. There was a table tennis and basketball. I went out and I was watching. It was at night, I think at 10 at night. I love to go walk at night, and I'm watching these guys playing basketball. And I sat there and I watched them play basketball, and I got reminded of the time in which in Afghanistan we used to play soccer. We used to play soccer a lot. And I got reminded of my friends with whom I grew up, with whom I played soccer, who are my goalkeepers, who are my defensive players, and who are no longer alive because of when we graduated high school, they had to join the military, and more often than not, they would not survive. Then I thought of it, in in having those experiences, I had this fear of loss. So I was hesitant to love people and to make deep connections, because I also had survival guilt in me. And so that's why I would, like in Turkey, I would see a guy and I would be like, I could be great friends with this guy. I'm in this country, great friends. And but then I would come home and immediately something would tell me, no, no, this friendship would end at some point, so let's not even start it. And I won't even start it. And it was that night that I realized, I thought, do these guys who are playing basketball ever worry that that friend who just high-fived him after like a 3-point, that his friend might not be alive after 1 year? He would never have to worry about it. That's why they can make those deep, deep bonds, because they do not have fear of loss. Um, that's when this realization dawned in me that peace is not merely a pause to violence or an absence of violence. Peace is a way of life. How you grow up, the way you shape your ideas, your whole mindset. That's what's called peace. Like here I am today, and now that I'm more aware of my survivor guilt and fear of loss, now I can make deeper connections with people who I wouldn't have been able to do the same if I was still in Afghanistan. The fact that I have a peace of mind when I sleep at night. I remember when my dad used to work for U.S. Embassy, and at some point he also worked for USAID, and these facilities were the main targets for Taliban. So after every suicide bombing, you hear it. You first feel the shockwave, and then you hear the sound. And I used to live in a mountainside, so then I would run onto the window as a kid to see where the smoke is coming up from, to see where the explosion happened. And I remember after every explosion, no matter where my mom was, if she was out with a friend, if she had this friend who used to come to my house and talk to a lot, if she was with her friends, she's also a teacher. If she had just gotten back from school and she was changing her uniform, the first thing she would do after an explosion, she was like, as soon as she would hear the sound, she would be like, bring me my phone, I want to call your dad and make sure he is fine. Because, and to me, the way it taught me to grow up as a kid is that when my dad walks out of the door in the morning, we don't know if he will come back at night. Because I saw the same thing happening to my neighbors. He went to work one day and then you hear a bombing and all you get is a call. And at best you get back an intact body inside a coffin, because usually you do not get back an intact body after a bombing. So those experiences had changed. I had this mindset of, I would say, a defensive mindset now that I realize. But coming to Turkey and then to United States, there have been people who I have loved very much, whether as friends or as close friends or as people I have known. And what's best to me is it makes my love for them much more. I remember I used to appreciate this one person so much, and we were in the same class, and we also lived very close to each other. And one day I looked at her, she was at my place, and I was staring for her for a long time, and I realized it feels so good to not worry that she will be blown away by a suicide bomb. It feels so great. It's like you feel like this heavy weight is not on top of you, and it's so relieving and it's so refreshing. Or wanting to go somewhere and not having to worry, what if Taliban stops us on the way and then we are beheaded and then we are in the news. And right now I'm driving back from California to Texas. I'm not worrying about anything. The only thing I'm worrying is like if I don't feel fatigue or if I'm not tired. If this was in Afghanistan, I would have had to, during my time in Afghanistan, I would have crossed 5 different front lines, and whether I would have survived them or not, that's why I would have never undertaken this trip. So in a sense, you also feel encaged when you are in war. Mm-hmm. You are like this encaged bird. You are a bird whose wings are tied and thrown into a cage. And more often than not, I think this is a good analogy because birds also sing. And more often than not, because you lose the freedom of expression, somebody has tied your mouth as well. Like you are a bird with tied wings inside a cage and tied mouth. And you don't realize how bad that life was until you experience the latter, until you experience relative freedom and peace of mind.
Oh my gosh. I have to tell you, Shahir, I haven't, the reason I started focusing on Afghanistan is because of the injustice that Afghans have been through. And I've not felt so on fire to try to bring peace to Afghanistan as I feel right now listening to you talk about what that was like, because I was reading things out of books from practitioners who work on post-conflict state reconstruction, and even that to me was like I wanted to go. I wanted to go. I wanted to help Afghans get out of that constant state of war and to find peace and to, make sure the Taliban couldn't come back. That was like my life's goal. And just, yeah, hearing you talk about it reminds me of why I thought that was important. And I hope that everybody's who's listening hears that too. This is what you're describing is the reason that so many American veterans, so many Americans who went over to be teachers or, contractors or to do religious work, whatever they went over to Afghanistan for 20 years is to try to bring that peace to you so that you didn't have to come here to find it. And I could listen to you talk about these stories all day because you tell them beautifully. And it's tugging at my heart, but I also want to hear about your family because that's the other part of what we're here to talk about. And so I think we should transition to how they're holding up. So far I understand your dad worked for the U.S. Embassy and for USAID. Is that how he qualified for these programs that should bring him to safety?
Yes, yeah, he worked as a well, I won't say the position, but for some reasons, but he worked with USAID from 2004 to 2006. So he worked 2 years there, and it was in a security capacity. Um, and then from there, apparently there was a program that if you did really well with USAID, then you would be sent to work with US Embassy. So then from 2006, he was sent to US Embassy in Kabul and worked with them until 2007. So he worked from 2004 to 6 with USAID, and then from 6 to 7 with US Embassy. And then after 2007, he no longer continued because my mom, it was too much for my mom, and my mom could not put up with the constant fear of what if what if something happens because Taliban are fighting the United States. So what's the hotspot to target? It's USAID, it's US Embassy, and whoever affiliated with it. So even if it was not an individual prosecution, it was what if just a suicide bombing happens, as it did happen, and then you're caught there because you're going to work or coming back from it. So that's how he got qualified for SIV. Um, but he also qualifies for P2 because in 2009 he started working with an organization called Afghan Aid. He was working with Afghan Aid, which is an international non-government organization based off of Britain, um, and they focus on Afghanistan and they focus on helping people. So he has been working with them since 2009, and that organization executes many projects of themselves as well as projects given by foreign governments. For instance, like if British government has a project and they're looking for an NGO to execute it, they would be given to them. So he qualified for P2 because he had worked with on that project through Afghan Aid when Afghan Aid had the project with the US Embassy, with the US government. And as soon as the government collapsed in Afghanistan and among the chaos, USRAP had sent the project, the person who had approved the project by the US government sent a letter to Afghan Aid saying, send us a list of everybody who was involved in our project in Afghan Aid, and they will be referred to priority 2 for USRAP. So that's how he ended up getting P2.
So that's really interesting. I've not heard many people who were simultaneously able to do SIV and P2. And so usually people I talk to would be told, no, just go through US or go through SIV. We're going to drop your P2 case. But that those people usually, they didn't have two different sets of jobs to qualify them. So was your dad told to just stick with SIV, or has he processed both simultaneously?
Uh, no, he was told, as you mentioned, on the email that USRAP sends, it's called like a welcome email that they sent you with your case number and referral agency. They mention explicitly that if you qualify for SIV, do not process the P2.
Ooh, that makes me so mad. And I want to tell people why, just in case they have missed this small little detail. Like SIV, so I'm sure, Shahir, you saw the draft of the travel ban that now people are saying is fake, and there's so much, the rumor mill is crazy right now, but the draft of the travel ban that came out last week on Friday said all travel from Afghanistan banned, no visa exceptions. Okay, that would mean that SIV applicants like your father would not be able to come here. However, refugee processing was not supposed to be included in that, from everything that I heard, which would mean that if the USRAP were recommenced and your father had a P2, that he would be allowed to use that. So, and all of this to say, like I said in the beginning, by the time that this comes out, we will know what is happening with the travel ban and where your father's situated in that. But I think it's abhorrent that people were told, oh, we'll just go with this, when in fact they may have been processed more quickly with the other method. They may have found a place to go to safety more easily with the other method. And when someone has qualified for both of those programs, they should have been able to pursue both programs, in my opinion. And now I'd love to hear from you. Tell me, where is your dad in the SIV process right now?
He received his chief of mission approval about 14 months ago, and his NVC processings are all done. The last time I called NVC, his case was sent to U.S. Embassy in Doha, and what NVC told me, National Visa Center told me, that my dad should be waiting for a call from CARE to take them to Qatar, which I do not think they operate anymore, and it doesn't seem as if they would continue their operations.
So your dad still needs to complete what steps in order to get out of where he is right now?
He is left on himself to travel to a third country right now.
Okay.
So he would have to go to a third country, and since his case has already been sent to U.S. Embassy in Doha, so we would prefer that he's trying to go to Qatar, Doha, and then do his medical examinations there. We contacted the U.S. Embassy in Doha to get an exact interview time so that he could arrange his travel to Doha, because it's very, very expensive to be in Doha in your own money. And the response from the U.S. Embassy was they will not set up an appointment date unless we show the proof that he is physically present in Doha. So they have accepted to take his case, to give him an interview time. That interview time will not be given until he is physically present in Doha.
Okay. Can he do that? I mean, you said the expense, but like, could he physically do that?
It's very hard. So what we did was, my advice to my dad was we should take this step by step. And the first step, and perhaps the hardest step, is whether Qatar would issue a visa without the U.S. referral. Because when CARE gets visas for Afghans, it's through U.S. government, and there's no problem in it. But if you apply for it individually, then there's a very high chance that you would get rejected. And his visa has been pending for almost 1 month, his Qatari visa. Um, so we will see.
Oh no, it's so frustrating. And tell me, I mean, your dad has been living in the country now for years after the Taliban's takeover. What have those years been like?
It they have been well. First, they have been. I would say I'm thankful, or maybe I'm minimalistic, because my initial thought process was as soon as Taliban take over Kabul, they will just start killing everybody because they show no mercy. We saw it, and I saw it in my 18, 19 years of life in Afghanistan. But that, of course, didn't happen. They didn't just start slaughtering anyone they saw. But there has been instances in which my dad has had to live in fear because of repercussions. Like an instance was when Taliban took over Kabul, they very soon starting house to house searching for weapons. They say this for weapons, but people were also afraid and they were hiding their documents. Like if you had worked with U.S. Embassy, you should be clever enough to hide your HR document that shows that you had worked with U.S. Embassy. And my dad had this one picture that he actually very much likes because that's the only memory he has left of his time at U.S. Embassy, to which like he's shaking hands with U.S. ambassador of the time. I don't quite remember his name off of my top of my head right now, but they're shaking hands and like there's a U.S. flag on the ambassador side and there's a Afghan flag on my dad's side and my dad is very happy shaking hands. So yeah, he had this picture at home with him and he really liked it. And then when Taliban started searching house by house, they would tell you that your building's turn is, for instance, tomorrow. So be ready that our search teams would come. I remember him calling me and telling me like it was in evening in Afghanistan when he called me, and he was like, what should I do with that picture? At least like he was like documents I could put them somewhere, or maybe if they find it, maybe hopefully people who are searching don't understand English. But what about the picture? I cannot hide the picture because it's visual evidence, and unless you're blind, visual evidence is enough of a thing. So he was renting a place. He moved out of the place in which we were living because we had many neighbors who were imprisoned, like perhaps not many immediate neighbors, but from our neighborhood. We had many people who were detained in collaboration with Taliban under the assumption that they had collaborated with Taliban or with ISIS during the Afghan government.
Yeah.
But after the takeover of Kabul, they were all freed and they were free and they were returning back to my neighborhood. So my dad moved out of there and they rented a place 6 months before the collapse of the government. As the situation kept deteriorating, my dad moved out of there and they rented an apartment in another place in Kabul. But then to hide that picture, I remember he told me, "Oh, I can take it back to our own house and put it behind we call it the stack, and it is what keeps the roof up." And so he said, "I'm gonna go put it behind that, and hopefully they will not be searching the ceiling for anything." So to me, we laughed just like me and my dad laughed about it. But if when I thought deep about it, if you collaborated with United States, with all the ability that they have, you stood up for yourself, for your people, for United States, shoulder to shoulder, and you fought for the common interest of your people, which aligned with the United States. You should not be living in fear. If United States has the power to change the situation, if they don't have the power to change it, then you say, well, it's fine, they can't do anything. It's like my sisters cannot go to school. Well, I can do nothing to change it. Taliban rule the country. But if I was the United States government, then of course I could do something at least about people who are in fear, who collaborated with me. So that was one instance. And then there was one time my brother got into a fight with this one guy, who my dad was fearful if he is working with Taliban. And as they called me and they told me the story that my dad wasn't going to interfere with them, and and bring my brother home or stop whatever they were doing to him because he was fearful. What if this guy sees me and recognizes me? And then we're in a much bigger trouble. Right now, I don't know what the argument is over, but this could put our lives at risk. So a short answer would be, it's not that a hit team is after them, trying to, find and kill them, but they also have to hide a part of their identity, a part of their life, sweet memories, in order to survive in that society. And how long can you do that is the question.
Absolutely. I'm glad to know that he was able to keep those things though, and not, I had one really close contact, and I remember it broke my heart the day that he sent me, they were doing the house to house searches, and he took all of his documents and he put them in a burn can and he burned them. And then he sent me the copies to have in case he needed them down the road, all and it was so heavy for me that I held someone's most important life documents in my email, and he sent me pictures of him burning them, and it hits you. These are things that people should not have to do in their country, but you've described your country really well, and I think that's part of the experience right now under the Taliban is you can't do anything safely. I mean, they check your phone at checkpoints is what I've heard, and they'll go through and they look for certain things that would say that you're tied to Americans or somehow, not complying with their orders. And that's scary too. I can't imagine what it's like. Is your dad able to start his P2 case now, or is that still something that he's told not to do?
I'm not sure if he can start it now. Well, the first is that the refugee ban is still there, so I'm not sure if he can start it right now, due to the suspension.
Yeah.
And he at least with me, and I also advise him, neither him nor me has ever thought about starting it, just because we were explicitly told in an email that if you have SIV, do not pursue P2.
Oh, gosh, that will never stop making me angry that people were told that. I'll have to look that up. If there are any listeners who are listening now and think that it would be good that, Shahir's dad starts his P2 case and has insight on that, please do say something. Anybody knows how to get a hold of me. It's the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. But, because yes, USRAP is suspended, but it's also, there's an injunction that is supposed to force it back into working again. The U.S. government is not complying with that injunction. They have not restarted USRAP, but I do know of one case that by the time that this comes out, the story will appear, but of one case where a family with a USRAP referral was able to get here because of that injunction. So in the event that USRAP restarts, then maybe it's worth doing that. But, this is all conjecture and speculation right now. What would happen to your family? I mean, have they begun to make plans for if there is a travel ban that stops all future travel from Afghans to the U.S. for the duration of President Trump's presidency?
We haven't discussed it yet. The only thing I discussed with them is it was back in December, in which we discussed. I kind of had this inclination and based off of past experience with the presidency with this presidency, and then I was active on Twitter and I was reading some influential right-wing posts. So back then I told them, see if you could get out of Afghanistan by yourself and make it to United States before January 20th. That of course didn't happen because it required tons of financial resources that you don't have, and nobody will give you a visa. So I don't think in the future either, unless they go without a visa to a country. And right now, when I'm considering options, none of them look good. I hear news out of Pakistan. I talk to people in Pakistan. They are
Mm-hmm.
treated very harshly there. If you go to Iran, pretty much same story. And to make it worse, there is no U.S. embassy there either, so you can't even, be inquiring them about anything.
Yep.
So as of now, nothing, no.
That's so tough. Yeah, I would caution anyone who's listening to this who's thinking Pakistan is an option not to do it. Pakistan has threatened to start deporting all Afghans by April 1st, even if they are in processing pipelines, which just. And then I've heard horrible stories of detentions and people being deported back, which basically means you're being. One Afghan told me basically put right into the arms of Afghan or Taliban border police at Torkham Gate, which is just not the thing that you want if you're somebody who's trying to keep a low profile. So what I will do is hope that the news that comes out is good and that, your dad is so close to that SIV. Can I ask, when did he apply? Like, how long ago did he put in his SIV application?
The current application was submitted on October 2021, if I'm correct, October 20th, 2021.
And so what I would guess is your dad did not want to leave his homeland. Is that correct? But then with the Taliban takeover, what choice, explain to me why he chose to do it at that point and not prior. So many people the reason I'm asking this is Americans got up in arms saying, oh, well, now Afghans want to get out. Well, of course Afghans want to get out. It's October of 2021. It's September and August of 2021. We were told the Taliban will not take control of Afghanistan. And if they do, it won't be quick. And then that happened. So, what other choice do you have? So tell me, was your dad hoping to leave his homeland and go to the U.S., or was that kind of like a, I can't be here now, it's not safe option? What was his rationale for applying?
His rationale was I was quite surprised that he wasn't really worried about himself or even my mom.
Mm-hmm.
He called me in Turkey at the time, and all he told me was, I have 4 sisters, brilliant sisters, and I love them so much. My dad told me, I said, what should we do about your sisters? They are thrown into a cage right now, and I can do nothing about it, and it breaks my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the schools had just gotten banned, and they were at home crying all day, all night, and I can't even imagine how it feels like to lose all your hopes overnight. So that's how the idea first started. My dad was like, can I send them to Turkey to you? Can they at least come there? I don't care about myself. I don't care about your mom. I have 2 other brothers. And my dad was like, your brothers will find theirs, but what should I do about these 4 sisters? And I told him the sentiment is negative in Turkey. We don't have the money to make it here. If you make it through illegal ways, it's very, very dangerous. You might not even make it alive from the path you undertake to make it to Turkey legally. So then there was this vast effort by almost every agency who was active in Afghanistan during the United States presence to find their employees, let them know that they qualify for SIV or they have this opportunity to apply. And when he worked with USAID, he was in contact with Chemonics. So then Chemonics reached out to them, and somebody who was working with Chemonics reached out to him, and then some of his friends who had stayed and worked longer with U.S. Embassy, they reached out to him from United States, and they were like, this is the opportunity. You should take this. This is the road you can apply. So then that's how he decided to leave Afghanistan. Even until this day, he's not so fearful of himself or his life as he is for for my sisters and my and his siblings and his children, and that played a big role in his life. Like they sent me to Turkey, and they spent all their savings because they didn't want me to be something happen while I'm studying in Kabul University. So when Taliban happened, they just wanted that to not happen to my sisters and to give them an opportunity to at least live.
That breaks my heart. I've been reporting on all of the, not all, I'm sure, because not all of the edicts have come out into Western media, but the slow, taking away of rights from Afghan girls and women, and it's abhorrent. It's terrible to watch, and I can completely understand why your brother or your father would do that. And I want to say, this is why the SIV program was meant to take 9 months, federally mandated 9-month wait for SIV. Now, of course, State Department didn't expect to get an influx of applications because they didn't expect the country to fall. They had planned a sip and pour. I'll never stop talking about this because it's so irritating to me. They planned a sip and pour for like the day that the Taliban took control of the country and only canceled it at the last minute. It's like, you guys, do you not see what's happening? Everybody was throwing up warning signs. The Taliban are taking the country, and we just really did not have the eye on the ball. And so then you have so many Afghans trying to get out of the horrors that are coming with the Taliban, and you can't process everybody's case in enough time. And here's the problem. Those cases didn't get processed under President Biden, and now President Trump has changed everything. I'm so sad for what your family has faced with having to wait so long with all of this. And I want you to get the last word here, Shahir. So is there anything else you want to share about your family's story or about your time in the U.S. or just anything? The floor is yours for whatever you want to add to this.
Thank you. On my closing remarks, I just want to say that the stories that I told today are not just my stories. It's as alien as they might sound for an audience. It's the story of almost every Afghan. And specifically any Afghan who even had any values in similar with the United States, and they stood up for it and they fought for it. In my closing remarks, I want to say that I strongly agree that peace in the world is achieved through strength, but I do not think strength is abandoning your allies. Strength is standing by your word, gaining trust, and saving your allies when they were there when you needed them. I think it's only fair for United States, with all the great they have done throughout history, to follow on that path and take in the people in need now.
I agree with your sentiments completely, and I will just keep your family in my prayers, and hopefully there can be a resolution and they can get to safety. They're so close. And I just don't want to live in a country that doesn't fulfill that word. That's why I've been doing what I do for the last 3.5 years, because even if my government doesn't really want to apparently do this, I want to make sure that they do. We said we would do it. It matters to the veterans who fought in Afghanistan. It matters to the people who just care about Afghanistan. And it should matter. It should matter to every American. We said we'd do something. We should do it. Well, Shahir, I can't thank you enough for taking this time, for just sharing everything that you did. It was really amazing to hear from you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity in amplifying voices of Afghans in times of need. Thank you.
No, it's an absolute honor. And I just want to put out the call to any Afghans who want to share their story. I know that there are so many people who can't use their face and voice, and yet they have a lot to say right now. And for anyone who wants to share a story, you can always send a letter to the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com, and I will read that out at the end of an episode, so that people can hear stories like yours, Shahir. That's, those are the things that we need to be listening to right now. I want more people to be able to experience peace. I think that's an amazing thing, to get the opportunity to learn what peace feels like. And I want that for Afghans, but I want that for them in their homeland too. It's so important that we make sure that the Taliban are not able to drag Afghans into hell over and over and over again. But that's a story for another time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking the time, for supporting the people of Afghanistan, and Tashakur for now, and hope to see you again soon.